Hi there, once again, I am Matt Donnelly of RotoBaller, and this is the RotoBaller Must Start and Must Sit show heading into week number 5 of the 2023 NFL season. But before we get into those starts and sits, again, I have to come up with a couple public service announcements. First, plenty can happen from Monday when this video is being recorded to Sunday's kickoffs, so be sure to sign up for the RotoBaller Discord channel where experts are there to answer all your start and sit questions throughout the week. And second, we are officially at the point of the 2023 season where bye weeks are beginning to creep in. There are 4 teams on bye this week, and those teams include the Cleveland Browns, the Los Angeles Chargers, the Seattle Seahawks, and the Tampa Bay Buccaneers, which basically means that fantasy managers must go without the likes of Kenneth Walker III, Jerome Ford, Rashad White, and Joshua Kelly. Then again, we've basically been going without Joshua Kelly for the last couple weeks. Hey, am I wrong? No, probably not. We also have some injuries that we need to consider, like Javonte Williams, who left last week's game with a hip injury, and Saquon Barkley, who should be available after dealing with an ankle injury the last couple weeks. We also welcome back Alvin Kamara, who had an impressive 13 receptions on 14 targets in his return to action. I'm not even going to put him in my starts and sits, but if a dude is going to get 13 receptions or see 14 targets a game, he's going to be a must start each and every week. Now, let's hit the ground running with the week 5 must start and must sit players at the running back position. Starting with Brian Robinson of the Washington Commanders against the Chicago Bears. Yeah, that's right. If you're playing the Chicago Bears, you're probably going to be in my must-start column. You want to get an offense clicking, you play this Bears team. Chicago is allowing the second most fantasy points to the running back position, and this is after Javonte Williams left the contest early last week. The Bears D are allowing over 33 fantasy points per game and have allowed 4 touchdowns on the ground, along with 384 rushing yards in those 4 games. I hope you bought low on Brian Robinson last week because he could realistically finish as a top 12 fantasy running back with this matchup. Maybe the Commanders even let Antonio Gibson play this week. No, probably not. Now expect this to be one of those positive game scripts, which means Robinson should see between 20 and 25 carries. Another running back that you're starting this week is David Montgomery versus the Carolina Panthers. We know how this Lions backfield is going to play out. And if you are a Jahmyr Gibbs manager, your time is not now. I'm sorry. In a game in which the Lions were beating the Packers by 2 scores, it was Montgomery that was still getting all the carries, 32 of them to be exact, not to mention all the goal line work. So when the Lions go into Carolina facing a Panthers defense that is allowing the 4th most fantasy production to backs this season, who do you think is going to get a majority of those 29.6 fantasy points per game that the Panthers are allowing weekly? It's going to be David Montgomery. Only the Denver Broncos, more on them here in a second, have allowed more than the 6 touchdowns in 4 games that the Panthers have allowed opposing backs on the ground. Now, I was tongue-in-cheek here this offseason when I said that David Montgomery was going to be a top 12 fantasy back. Turns out I may have been a little bit low on that prediction. Who would have known? Another running back that I know is going to be in my starting lineup is Devin Achen versus the New York Giants. Another 100 yards and 2 touchdowns on the ground for Devin Achen after 200 yards and 2 touchdowns on the ground the week before. And we're not even counting his work in the receiving game. Achen goes from an RB3 flex option to a weekly start, RB2 at worst. And this week, I'd be shocked if he did not continue to produce against a Giants team that is allowing more than 25 fantasy points per game to the position. In 4 weeks, Achen sits 4th in rushing fantasy points with 54.9, which trails only Christian McCaffrey, teammate Raheem Mostert, and David Montgomery. Finally, another start for me is Breece Hall versus the Denver Broncos. Yes, you start everybody against the Denver Broncos. It doesn't matter. They don't even have to be healthy. They can be on the IR, and I'm probably still starting them against the Denver Broncos. We've been waiting all year for this, but this week, Breece Hall returns to his glorious fantasy self against the Denver Broncos. How bad are the Broncos? They have allowed 613 yards on the ground and 7 touchdowns to running backs. They've also allowed an additional 225 yards and 4 touchdowns to opposing backs in the passing game. They are allowing 10 more fantasy points on a per-game basis than any other team in the National Football League. If there is a game to kickstart this Jets running game, this is it. If you want to sleep in this week, how about Jaleel McLaughlin, who came in relief for Javonte Williams last week and carried the ball 7 times for 72 yards, and he faces a Jets defense that got a very healthy dose of Isaiah Pacheco last week. Now for running backs that I'm sitting, it starts with Dania Pierce versus the Atlanta Falcons. Pierce, he had a good matchup last week and he performed admirably. This week, the matchup is not nearly as good as the Texans face a tough fantasy defense in the Atlanta Falcons. Atlanta is allowing the second fewest fantasy points per game, allowing just 12.9 to backs this season. As hard as it is to believe, they haven't even allowed a back to reach the end zone a quarter of the way through the season. Another running back that you have to sit is Madre Stevenson versus New Orleans Saints. Another player who is officially out of my circle of trust heading into Week 5's contest against the Saints team that is ranked 8th in fantasy points thus far this young season, yielding just 15.1 per game. Stevenson is coming off yet another disappointing performance against the Dallas Cowboys, in which he had 14 carries and was only able to churn out 30 yards on the ground. This is the same Dallas defense that just allowed James Conner to rush for nearly 100 yards while averaging 7 yards per carry the previous week. I know McCorkle Jones was pulled in favor of Bailey Zappi here, but the offensive struggles, they go much deeper than the quarterback position. Another running back that you're sitting this week is Zach Moss versus the Tennessee Titans. You know how I feel when it comes to starting running backs against this Titans team. You don't do it. That simple. 2 weeks ago, Jerome Ford, he had a fine day as far as fantasy is concerned, thanks to those 2 touchdowns. But we're talking like 18 yards on 10 carries. That is not going to cut it. Last week, Joe Mixon had a little bit of a better day rushing the ball, running the ball 14 times for 67 yards. That's only 8 fantasy points. Tennessee is allowing 13.2 fantasy points to the running back position through 4 weeks, and they've allowed just 227 yards to date. I'd feel much better about Moss if he had some kind of receiving upside, but coming off a contest in which he saw just 1 target, that's not going to instill much confidence in anybody. So let's hit the ground running with the Week 5 running back starts and sits. You're starting Brian Robinson versus Chicago. Bears are allowing a rushing touchdown per game, so watch Robinson end up with a pair this week. David Montgomery versus Carolina is another great matchup to begin with. Forget about the 30-plus carries that he's going to get. Devin Achen versus, does it even matter at this point? Fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, shame on me. I ain't getting fooled again. And Breece Hall versus the Broncos defense in 4 games that have allowed 838 total yards and 11 touchdowns to backs. Yeah, you're starting Breece Hall. Sit him. Dania Pierce against the second best fantasy defense. There are better matchups out there for you to exploit. Ramondre Stevenson versus New Orleans. Promise has not met production this year, so I promise Stevenson will be on my bench. And Zach Moss versus Tennessee. You don't tug on Superman's cape and you don't mess around with them Titans. I'm telling you right now, sit Zach Moss. But be sure to like and subscribe to the RotoBaller YouTube channel for plenty more great fantasy football analysis. Pitter patter, let's get at her.